Great time, and hopefully next year.
And maybe even some of us older owners is, for help. But I'm back.
Time for throwback fools. Hey up, fools! Big T here, and I'm back with my final N64 collection video. I started this probably over 2 years ago, and I realized that I needed to finish this thing on up. This video, unlike the previous videos in this series, will be ranked. So basically, my lowest ranked game to the highest ranked game. And this isn't overall for the entire system, because I'll have to use every game in the series to do that. But just for this group of games that I have left, this will be ranked from lowest to highest. Games that I basically think you guys should go out and get right away, right now. So to get your collection started, if you're getting started, those will be the last 10 games. So make sure you check that out. Watch the entire video and enjoy. So let's get started with Tiggers Honey Hunt. This is not a great game or anything like that. It just happens to be one of those games in my collection. And yes, it's a decent game for what it is. So next up, we got Battle Tanks. This is a pretty good game, pretty fun explosions and all that stuff. Battle tank game. It is what it sounds like. It's tanks battling other tanks and destroying cities, and pretty fun doing that. Next up, we have V-Rally 99. I believe this is the first game in the series. V-Rally. There's actually a V-Rally game on Switch currently. It is the third, I think. I got this one. I also have the V-Rally for Xbox OG, and maybe at some point I'll get the Switch version. Next up, we have Revote. This is a pretty cool little game with like RC style controlled cars. Your little cars in a big world, and it's pretty fun. So check that out. And here we have Ger Battle 64. Very cool strategy RPG game. You guys should be probably familiar with it. It's a really cool series. I'm not sure if they make Ger Battle games anymore, but in the 90s they were somewhat popular. So yeah, Ger Battle 64. Next up, one of my favorites, I think is totally a hidden gem on the Nintendo 64, and that is Hybrid Heaven, coming to you from Konami, back when Konami used to make games. This game actually started out, I believe, as a version, at least, of Metal Gear on Nintendo 64. There's a little tidbit for you. It turned into something completely different, which I totally appreciate. It is one of the most interesting RPGs I think I've ever played. RPG with wrestling moves. Has a really cool sci-fi storyline to it. So it's a very different setting mostly from most of the RPGs out there, and I really liked it. Hybrid Heaven. Next up, we have Space Station Silicon Valley. One of those hidden gems again. Most people didn't hear about this game or don't know about this game, but it's a very unique puzzle platformer, I guess. It's not really a platformer, but it's a puzzle game with that kind of mascot kind of look and feel to it. So that's why I call it a puzzle platformer. But it's a game brought to us by DMA Design. So this is their beginnings. Space Station Silicon Valley is a really cool game. Should definitely have it in your collection if you have an N64. Up next is Command & Conquer. This is a port from the PC and is a pretty decent port. Was happy to see a version of the game come to the N64, and it's a pretty accurate version. Obviously, they had to scale it back to some degree as far as the controls and whatnot go, but it's pretty right there with the PC version for the most part. So yeah, Command & Conquer definitely should be in your collection if you're an N64 owner. And next up, we have Body Harvest. When I was talking about Space Station Silicon Valley, this is the other game by DMA Design on the N64. This one was published by Midway, but this is the same guys who brought you GTA. And if you play this game, you'll definitely see Grand Theft Auto beginnings in this, because you can hop into vehicles and it's an open world game and you drive around and you can just pilot all kinds of stuff, and this is the beginnings of Grand Theft Auto series. So this is where it all started. So for that alone, you should probably pick up this game if you're an N64 owner. But I mean, it is still a really good game, and I don't know how it became a good game if you know the history of this game, the crazy development cycle. There was some issues between Nintendo and the DMA design, and that's probably what led to Grand Theft Auto never coming to a Nintendo platform. So even to this day, outside of Chinatown Wars on DS. So we'll see if that ever happens. We don't know if there's still bad blood between these two entities, but maybe one day we'll get GTA on a Nintendo platform. So yeah, Body Harvest is a dope game. Should definitely have it in your collection. Next up, we have Sin and Punishment. This game only released in Japan, and I have that copy right here. And I think it's probably expensive to get these days, but you can, if you have a Wii, you could anyway, not now, but you could download this on your from the Wii eShop. This is one of those games on the Virtual Console, but it never came out in North America. But obviously, you can import it, play it for your N64. The American version, just have to do a quick little easy hardware mod, no big thing. Anybody can do it. And this is one of those Treasure games, which was amazing to play. Treasure just brought it, especially in the 90s. So Sin and Punishment, dope game. Next up, we have Star Wars Rogue Squadron, the game that started it all. Rogue Squadron was a great game, brought sound to the N64 that we didn't know existed, the quality of sound, great soundtrack, obviously. Some of the best visuals you're going to find on the N64. It really looks good. Brought to you by those wizards at Factor 5. This was their beginnings, and they went on to have a nice little relationship with Nintendo through the GameCube. So this is where it started, and it's a great game. You should definitely have this game, especially if you're a Star Wars fan. Next up, we have Blast Corps. This is one of the early rare games on the N64. A lot of fun. Basically, you're clearing the way for this nuclear warhead that's gonna, if it hits anything, it's gonna blow up and be a catastrophic disaster, obviously. Using different vehicles to clear the way so it doesn't crash into anything and end the world or something, end the world for a lot of people anyway. So really fun early N64 game. And next up, another early rare game, and that is Killer Instinct Gold. This was one of the first games that was talked about before the N64 launched, back when it was still called the Ultra 64. And we were promised basically the arcade version of this game, Killer Instinct, and we didn't really get that when the N64 came out. There was definitely some drawbacks. There was definitely some things about the game that weren't as good as it was advertised, so that was sad, but it was still a really good fighting game, early fighting game from those craftsmen at Rare when they were still great back in the day. So yeah, Killer Instinct Gold definitely needs to be in your collection. Next up, we have Shadowgate 64, Trials of the Four Towers. This is a very Lord of the Rings like Western RPG style game. I think this is one of those games that most people do not remember, and sadly so. It was a great game for the N64, one of the few RPGs we had for the system, and really good. It was a really good story, really good visuals for the game. One of my favorite games on the system, no doubt. And up next is Glover, a very unique, cool platformer starring a mascot that basically is a animated glove, or a glove come to life, and it's basically a glove and a ball, and really cool physics-based platforming with this game. This is another one of those really underrated games. The N64 got a lot of great platformers, and the ones that were just good or okay went under the radar. But this one was, I feel like, was a really good one, and they had a nice, cool mechanic to it that set it apart from the other ones. And yeah, if you have an N64 and you're a platforming fan, you will love. I think you're gonna love Glover. It's one of those hidden gems that I think a lot of fans should definitely check out. Next up, DK64, Donkey Kong 64. This game gets a lot of flack lately in these days. I think it only had one fatal flaw, and I don't want to say fatal, that might be too much, but there's another one of those great rare platformers, 3D platformers, and its main flaw is that you had to do everything with every different Kong. You had to do the same thing with every different Kong, instead of having the Kongs be unique to where you're getting to areas that only a certain Kong could get to and opening up new areas. it was basically running through the same level with every Kong, and that was just, it got pretty tedious after a while. But the visuals in this game are great. The audio is really good, and it's a really good game still. It's just that one thing that holds it back. I hope Retro or somebody steps up and tries to do another 3D Donkey Kong game, because it wasn't the problem of the game being in 3D. Like I said, it was just that one mechanic of it. So hopefully we'll get another one. Next up, we have Rayman 2: The Great Escape. Arguably the best Rayman platformer out there. Very inventive, very colorful, wonderful world. It was the first Rayman game I felt Rayman was truly a unique character, and it's just a great 3D platforming game. And the Dreamcast version is probably the definitive version because visually and it runs a little better, but it really doesn't matter where you get this game. It's basically the same game, and I don't really care for the Dreamcast controller. Obviously I love the N64 controller, so I'd rather play it there. But yeah, Rayman 2: The Great Escape, a great game. Next up, we have Banjo Tooie, another great 3D platformer. Obviously the N64, like I said, was known for great 3D platformers. This is the sequel to the classic Banjo Kazooie, and just a great game that expanded on many things. It may have gone too far in some areas, maybe did a little too much sometimes, but still a great 3D platformer. And here we go with the top 10 games on the console, starting with Super Smash Bros., the original 1999 release. A great game that came out of nowhere and just took us all by storm. And obviously it's a series that's still going very strong today. The original is great. This is the Japanese version that they, instead of calling Toad in Japan, they call him Pinocchio or Pinocchio, something like that. And it's just funny to me. But yeah, this is the Japanese version of the game. It's the same. Smash Brothers is one of the best series out there on Nintendo, hands down. And next up, we have another great rare 3D platforming game, more of an action game this time, and that is Conker's Bad Fur Day. Conker is obviously known for his raunchy humor and pop culture references in the game. It's just a really solid, really good game right at the end of the life cycle for N64. It just came at a time where a lot of people just kind of missed it towards the end of the life cycle, but a great game. I think this game is highly collectible for some reason. It sold pretty decent, but I think it pulls a pretty penny today. But anyway, you should definitely have this in your collection. Conker's Bad Fur Day. Next up, one of my favorite games basically of all time, Force Gemini, another great rare game. And to define this game, it would be, I guess, to call it a shooter platformer, space adventure. It's just a great game. We just don't get games like this anymore, sadly. I think Recore, had they just did their magic and worked it into a Jet Force game, and added in all the characters in the worlds, it just would have been astounding, because that game feels like it wants to be Jet Force sometimes, a lot of times. And I think maybe if it was that, it would have done a lot better. That is Recore. But Jet Force Gemini, man, it's just a great game. And the soundtrack, my goodness, especially on a cartridge, one of the best soundtracks of any game as far as I'm concerned. Just great. So yeah, if you have an N64 and you don't have Jet Force Gemini, you're using your N64 wrong, no doubt. Next on my list is the great Starfox 64. It is one of the best games on the N64, easily the best game as far as I'm concerned. The best Starfox game, I should say. And I love it to death, man. This is the game that solidified me as a Starfox fan for all time. And it's great. And if you haven't played this, what are you doing with your N64? Next up, I mean, come on, GoldenEye 007 doesn't need an introduction. Do you guys really need to know what this game is? Do I really need to tell you? This is one of the best, if not the best, shooters ever in that era, especially on console. It showed the industry how to do a shooter properly on a gaming console. That's a genre that was a PC thing, first-person shooters, and man, GoldenEye showed you how to do it right. They didn't rush the game. They could have, but they waited for the N64, and they made sure they got it right. And boy, did they! The game came out like 2 years after the movie itself, and it still sold gangbusters. One of the best selling games on the N64, just one of the best games on the N64, and I still love it to this day. We got Goldeneye, and then instead of paying for that license again for 007, Rare decided to make their own character, Joanna Dark, and they made another classic in Perfect Dark. An amazing, amazing game, amazing tech, amazing weapons, great story, some of the best visuals on the N64. I mean, it was pushing the N64. You had to use the 4 megabyte cart, expansion cart, to play this game to its fullest, and they had bots. This game has everything. It just took what they did with GoldenEye and just folded it 10 times and made just a gaming classic. And it's a shame that this game hasn't been reintroduced. It hasn't been looked at again as far as the franchise goes, outside of that abysmal Perfect Dark Zero that came out on Xbox 360 launch, and that was a terrible game, and I don't want to mention it, but had to. But Perfect Dark for N64, a great game. If you do have an N64 and don't have this game, what are you doing? I have to keep saying that. Next up, Banjo Kazooie. Just how many times do I have to talk about this game? It beat out even Mario 64 in my Versus video. Go check that out and see all the points I broke it down. It is just an amazing 3D platformer, right there with the best of what Nintendo can do, no doubt. Amazing soundtrack. The characters were great. The villain, Gruntilda, is amazing, and her whole rhyming style of talking is just. This game is just so charming. The visuals are just some of the best you'll see of that era. It was like playing a Saturday morning cartoon adventure, and I just loved it from beginning to end. And it's just a classic, man. To me, it is the best of what Rare could do, and I love it to death. And you definitely better have this on your N64. Next up is one of the greatest Zelda games of all time. I have the gold cart version, the somewhat rare version with the kind of 3D cover art, and that is Majora's Mask. Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Classic game. Don't need to tell you too much about it. I'm sure you know all about it. And this is where it all started, the N64 with the Majora's Mask, and it was the second 3D Zelda game, and it's just amazing. The whole mask implementation, being able to change into different character classes, being able to change into different races like the Goron and the Zora, was just so much fun. It added so much gameplay. And great soundtrack, great story, dark story. One of my favorite and definitely one of the best Zelda games out there, Majora's Mask. Next up, I mean, come on. Super Mario 64 is the game of the N64. It is the game that showed everybody how to make a 3D game. The whole industry was definitely struggling on how to implement 3D graphics into gaming. Super Mario 64 showed everyone how to do it. It was like Miyamoto at his peak performance. He was, doing some amazing things with his game. Koji Kondo's soundtrack is freaking amazing. The gameplay, the worlds, everything about this game is just great. And I used to play this game to death. It was one of the few games I had early on with my N64, and I played it and played it and played it and played it, trying to find secrets that didn't exist. Everything, every nook and cranny of this world, I searched, and it was just fun. So again, if you have an N64 and you don't have Super Mario 64, bruh, what are you doing? And my final game on this list of N64 games, and my favorite game probably of all time, is The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. This game completely blew my mind when it came out, and I just remember like following it through the years, from the first little demo they put together. It was pretty rudimentary, using old Zelda style models, to the more Ocarina of Time, the more Zelda 64 screenshots we started getting in magazines, and seeing the Triforce and all that stuff that actually didn't end up being in the game, but still it was just really cool to see this game progress through magazines and articles. And when it came out, completely blew my mind, completely changed gaming forever. And Nintendo just seemed to knock it out of the box with their just revolutionary games on the N64, and this was probably the peak game as far as revolution goes, just changing the industry outside of Mario 64, which also did a lot. But man, Ocarina of Time is just that game. Great soundtrack, great story, great pacing. This is one of the games that is so accessible for me to go back and play. I pretty much play this game and beat it every year. It's just every year since. So I'm sure I beat it multiple times in a year as well. It's just beautiful. Graphics are still great to me. Easily the best graphics on the N64. Just one of the best games of all time. And it's always voted the greatest game of all time pretty much every year, and hasn't been beaten. And I totally agree with it. It's just that game. So yeah, Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time is the top game to have on your N64. And that is it for my collection videos. Just go check out all my videos. You'll see me laud them and decide which ones I feel are the best. But these are definitely the tops. So definitely have these games in your collection if you're an N64 owner. And again, thank you guys for watching the video. I really appreciate that. Stay tuned for more. Thank you as always for watching and listening, and I'll see you fools next time. Peace out.